I'm Jessica Jackman. I'm a senior at Telluride High School, and over the summer I spent 6 weeks at the Tybee Island Marine Science Center, which is in Tybee Island, Georgia. So this is what it looks like on the outside, and if I were to flip like 180 degrees, I'd be directly at the beach, and right off would be the pier, which was all the action going on. And then there's Georgia, and off the coast there's 15 barrier islands. So I was living on Tybee, and I was able to take a paddleboard or a kayak about 20 minutes over to Little Tybee, and then I took a boat to Wausau, and I took a ferry to Sapelo. All right, so my first impressions, obviously it's gorgeous there. The water was warm, the sun was always out, even when it was raining. And these are my host parents, so I kind of had a whole bundle of people living with me. So my first set were Tom and Lisa Gray, and they're on the right. And I was living with them for about 2.5 weeks, and then I switched and lived with this lady named Barbara Baker, and I do not have a picture of her, so sorry about that. And I was living at Sheldon and Zelda's Tenenbaum's house with Barbara until Sheldon and Zelda got there, and then I lived with them for the rest of the 2.5 weeks. So this is what it looks like again. And so if you walked in, there'd be a gift shop, and there'd be an aquarium, and then in the back, there was this kind of lavish area. They were trying to grow some jellyfish, and they were making their own water for the aquarium. And obviously, it was burning up down there. I was sweating all the time. We had a heat index of 110 one day, and so we had to change around our plans because it was so hot we couldn't go outside. And so typical day, not so typical. I was doing everything from summer camps with little kids to ecology lessons with Girl Scout troops. I would do these things called cart programs, so I'd put out a cart and put all these artifacts on it, and then I'd talk about it to the general public. And then the special trips. So this is Ike, and Ike was a sea turtle at the aquarium, and he was a straggler in his nest, so they had a nest hatch last summer that had 28 baby sea turtles in it, and they were live, and they had been there for 5 days, and so they took them out, and they let 27 go, and they held on to Ike, and he was part of the Running Start program, and so they held him for a year, and he's going to be released this month, and they were trying to make him grow larger than he would normally, so he had a better chance of surviving. And so I would feed him those fiddler crabs up in the corner, and you'd pinch him by the claw, and you'd drop him in. It was pretty sad, but, circle of life, I guess. And so then I did these ecology walks with the Girl Scout troops. And so we'd go out to the marsh, and we'd wade through this mucky water in our knee-high boots. And we'd talk about how important the marsh was, even though it was hot and sweaty and miserable. And I learned that 90% of marine life actually depend on the marsh, whether it's as a food source or where they go to have their babies. And it's starting to decrease, which is not a good thing. And so I don't know how to play that. Okay, awesome. So this is a time lapse of the marsh filling up during the tides, and it's kind of like a sponge. It acts like a sponge, and it soaks up all the water that comes through, and I was surprised how much water it really does hold. And so it's really important if a hurricane were to come through, it would totally be soaked up before it started flooding, and so it was really good protection to the island before it would flood. So it fills up like this every 6 hours is a different tide change, so it's twice in a 24-hour period. And obviously it fills up a ton. And then we talked about the dynamics of the barrier islands. So I talked about Tybee being a barrier island, and it has the thing called the Southern Bight down in Georgia, which is where it funnels in like that. So when the water comes in, it gets funneled in, and it has a huge tide change. So from low tide to high tide, it's about 7 to 12 feet, and from shoreline to shoreline, it's about 40 to 50 feet. So you definitely knew when it was high tide. And also the sand dunes are really important. As you can see, there's these big mounds before the water starts, and those were kind of the protection for the barrier islands. So they were the barrier to the barrier islands. And then they had these big plants, the sea oats, that protected from the wind. And then I learned about the horseshoe crab, which is this really cool prehistoric living fossil, and he's 450 million years old, and he hasn't changed very much. He's got these really cool eyes, so he has 10 eyes, 2 compound ones, and then he has a couple that go down the back of his head, around his rim, and down his tail. And the compound eyes, so the 2 big main ones, they have huge optical nerves, which is really important for researchers because it makes it a lot easier for them to study. And then they have median eyes that detect ultraviolet light, so they see really well, and they can detect changes in moonlight. They also have awesome blood, so their blood, instead of iron-based, it's copper-based, so it's actually blue, and it contains these things called amoebocytes. And the amoebocytes create another form of blood cell that detects bacteria, and as it detects it, it clots. So researchers, this is not from my lab, but scientists will take the horseshoe crabs in, and they'll take out some of the blood, so the blue stuff is actually their blood. And then in medicine, they'll use new treatments or medicine, and they'll inject it into the blood, and they know if it clots, then they cannot use it because there's bacteria in it. And so instead of using this on rabbits or something like they used to, they can now use it on the blood. So then I went to Skidaway, which is it's part of the University of Georgia system, and I met this really cool guy named Mike Robinson, and he was a geological oceanographer. And so basically what he did is he took a big boat out, and he would send sound waves down to the bottom of the ocean floor, and he'd record how long it took for them to hit the bottom and come back up. And using that, he could see the different depths, and he'd find trenches or sunken ships or something like that. And then he used it they do this thing called dredging, where they take out the bottom of the sand, and they plop it up onto the shore. And so we saw how dredging was affecting and the erosion caused by it over time. And then I met Nancy Tenenbaum, which was my host dad's sister-in-law, and she started out as an intern, so kind of like I did. And she was researching about zooplankton and phytoplankton and how if you added one to an ecosystem or took one away, what would happen. And I also met this really sweet lady named Tina Walters, and she was studying blackgill, which is a disease in shrimp that is caused by a certain ciliate that will cause an accumulation of black substance on their gills, which makes it hard to breathe, and they get stressed and become more able to be eaten, I guess. And it's really prevalent off Georgia's waters, especially in Savannah, which is right where Tybee is. And so she was researching it, trying to figure out which ciliate, which is down in the corner, was causing that. And I also went to Sapelo and Wausau, and Sapelo is considered the birth of the ecology movement. And a research paper was written by Eugene Odom about the fragility of the wetlands, so the marsh area. And when he showed it to the scientific community, they were in awe, and they started to really realize that if they didn't take action, then something would happen to this vital land. And so outside of the work, the far picture is on Wausau, and it's a thing called the Boneyard, and it's a bunch of dead trees washed up like a mile long on the beach. And I just got to kind of explore it, find some cool crabs. And I also went to Atlanta to the Botanical Gardens, which are the top 2 pictures. And I got to go to the Atlanta Aquarium, too, which was more people than I'd ever imagined would go to an aquarium on a Tuesday. And then I went to the Charleston Sea Turtle Hospital, which was part of the aquarium for Charleston, and got to see some really cool research on how to take care of the sea turtles. A lot of them had hooks stuck in their throat or barnacles growing on their back, and so a lot of them were easy fixes, and some of them were not, and they had been there for a while. I also eat some really strange food. That was dinner one night, an octopus. Kind of terrified to eat it, so I didn't, but that was dinner. And then the far one is me on a paddleboard out in between Tybee and Little Tybee, and I was with my host parents' dog out on the paddleboard. So I got to do a lot of cool opportunities. And I just want to thank Pinhead and my host parents and my teachers and everyone that helped me get to my Pinhead internship. So thank you guys very much.